The United States tried something big in 1920. It made alcohol illegal. This was Prohibition. People thought it would make the country better. They thought crime would drop, health would get better, families would be stronger. Many believed it was a good idea. They called it the noble experiment. But things did not go as planned. People still wanted to drink. They found ways to get alcohol. Bootleggers made it. They smuggled it, and they sometimes used industrial alcohol. This was alcohol made for factories or hospitals. It was not for drinking. The government knew industrial alcohol could be turned into drinks. So they tried to stop it. They added poisons to it. This was done to make sure no one would drink it. It was a clear policy, but it led to a dark side of Prohibition. People got sick. Many died. This happened because they drank government-poisoned alcohol. This whole story is complex. It shows how far the government went. It shows the real cost of trying to control what people do. It raises a tough question. Did the government intentionally poison its own citizens? The answer is not simple, but the actions were real. The deaths were real, and the legacy of this time still sparks debate today. Prohibition began on January 17, 1920. The 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution started it. Then the Volstead Act came. This law spelled out how Prohibition would work. It banned making, selling, or transporting alcohol. It defined what intoxicating liquor was. It set up rules for enforcement. The idea behind Prohibition was simple. Many people saw alcohol as evil. They linked it to poverty. They blamed it for violence. They said it ruined families. Groups like the Women's Christian Temperance Union pushed hard for it. So did many religious leaders. They thought banning alcohol would clean up society. They believed it would bring a new era of peace and prosperity, and for a short time, some saw good things. Drunkenness on the streets went down. Arrests for public intoxication dropped. Some hospitals reported fewer cases of alcohol-related illnesses. It seemed for a moment that the noble experiment might work, but there was another side. Many Americans did not agree with the law. They liked to drink. They saw no harm in it. They felt the government was overstepping. So demand for alcohol did not disappear. It just went underground. This created a huge black market. People started making alcohol at home. This was called moonshine or bathtub gin. It was often crude. It could be dangerous. People also smuggled alcohol from Canada or other countries. Gangsters like Al Capone became powerful. They built empires on illegal booze. But there was also another source of alcohol. It was legal. This was industrial alcohol. Factories used it. Chemists used it. Hospitals used it. It fueled cars. It cleaned things. It was a key part of many industries. The government had to allow its production. The economy depended on it. This legal industrial alcohol became a major loophole. As bootleggers quickly realized they could get it. They could take this industrial alcohol. Then they could try to make it drinkable. This was a dangerous game, but it was a profitable one. And the government knew this. They saw it as a direct challenge to Prohibition. They had to act. They had to make industrial alcohol impossible to drink. This is where the story of intentional poisoning truly begins. The stage was set. A grand idea to fix society. A defiant public refusing to give up drinking. A vast criminal enterprise rising to meet that demand. And a government caught in the middle. It had to enforce a law that many hated. It had to find ways to stop the flow of illegal liquor. And it would use extreme measures to do it. Measures that would have deadly results. Industrial alcohol was important. It was used in so many things. It was in paints. It was in cleaning fluids. It was a solvent for chemicals. It was in medicines. It powered cars and machines. The country could not just stop making it. So even during Prohibition, distilleries could make alcohol for industrial uses. But there was a problem. Alcohol is alcohol. Industrial alcohol is chemically the same as the alcohol you drink. It is ethanol. The only difference is what it is intended for, and bootleggers knew this. They knew they could take industrial alcohol and sell it as drinkable spirits. This was a huge threat to Prohibition enforcement. The government already had a system for this. It was called denaturing. Denaturing means adding something to alcohol to make it undrinkable. This practice was not new. It had been around for years, long before Prohibition. Why? To avoid taxes. Alcohol for drinking was heavily taxed. Alcohol for industrial use was not. So, to ensure no one drank the untaxed industrial alcohol, chemicals were added. This made it useless as a drink. Before Prohibition, the denaturing chemicals were often bad-tasting things. They made the alcohol smell awful. They made it taste terrible. But they were not always deadly. The goal was to deter drinking, not necessarily to kill. When Prohibition started, denaturing became critical. It was no longer just about taxes. It was about enforcing the law. It was about stopping bootleggers. The government needed to make denatured alcohol truly undrinkable, and they needed to make it impossible for bootleggers to renature it. This meant removing the added poisons. The main chemical used for denaturing was methyl alcohol. This is also called wood alcohol. It is very different from ethanol, the alcohol you drink. Methyl alcohol is a potent poison. Even small amounts can cause blindness, larger amounts can cause liver damage, brain damage, and death. The government's Bureau of Industrial Alcohol set the formulas. They decided what chemicals would be added, and how much. At first, the formulas included some wood alcohol, and things like kerosene or benzene. These would make the alcohol smell and taste bad, and make you sick if you drank it. And bootleggers, however, were clever. They developed methods to purify the denatured alcohol. They would filter it, they would distill it again, they would try to remove the poisons. Sometimes they succeeded, at least partially, but often they did not, or they left enough poison to be harmful. This became a cat and mouse game. The bootleggers found ways around the denaturing. The government then looked for ways to make denaturing even stronger. They wanted to make it impossible to purify. They wanted to make it so dangerous that no one would dare touch it. This is where the policy turned much darker. The amounts of poison went up, and new, even more deadly chemicals were added. The government's actions became more aggressive, and the consequences for people who drank this alcohol became much more severe. This shift would lead to a public health crisis. It would become one of the most controversial parts of the entire Prohibition era. The bootleggers were good at their job, too good for the government's liking. They kept finding ways to clean industrial alcohol. They would remove the denaturing agents, then they would sell the alcohol to thirsty customers. This made a lot of money, but it also undermined the whole idea of prohibition. The government felt it was losing the fight. So they decided to get tougher. In the mid-1920s, especially around 1926 and 1927, the policy changed. The government decided to make denatured alcohol much more dangerous. They wanted to ensure that if anyone drank it, they would regret it. Or worse. Andrew Mellon was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time. He oversaw prohibition enforcement. He pushed for stronger denaturing formulas. He argued that the government was not poisoning people. He said they were just enforcing the law. He believed the blame lay with the bootleggers. And with the people who chose to drink illegal alcohol, the new formulas were much more toxic. They significantly increased the amount of methyl alcohol. Methyl alcohol is wood alcohol. It is a powerful poison. They also added other deadly chemicals, things like benzene. This is a known carcinogen. Kerosene was still used. But they also added things like iodine, even sometimes strychnine or nicotine. These are potent poisons. The government's goal was deterrence. They wanted to make denatured alcohol so lethal that bootleggers would stop using it. They wanted people to be scared to drink any alcohol that might have come from an industrial source. They believed this was the only way to effectively enforce the law. But did they know it would kill people? Yes, they absolutely did. Public health officials warned them. Doctors spoke out. They said that increasing these poisons would lead to deaths. They said it was like a slow form of murder. But the government largely ignored these warnings. They felt they had no other choice. They were committed to the noble experiment, and they were determined to win. The logic was simple, from the government's point of view. Industrial alcohol was clearly marked. Everyone knew it was not for drinking. If bootleggers purified it badly and people drank it, that was not the government's fault. The government was just making sure industrial alcohol stayed industrial. But this argument was thin. People were not directly drinking alcohol straight from the factory. They were drinking what they thought was purified liquor. They bought it from bootleggers. They did not know the specific poisons inside, and they certainly did not know the amounts. The government's policies were making the black market incredibly dangerous. This escalated the fight. It moved it from a legal battle to a public health crisis. The government was using deadly chemicals. They were putting them into a product that they knew people would try to drink. This was a deliberate act. It was done to enforce a law, but the consequences were horrific, and they quickly became clear. The deaths and illnesses started to mount, and the public outcry grew louder. The line between enforcing a law and directly causing harm became very blurry. The consequences of the government's policy were dire, and they were felt quickly. People started getting very sick. Many went blind, some suffered paralysis, and thousands died. The exact numbers are hard to pin down. Many deaths were likely not reported as linked to poisoned alcohol, but estimates vary widely. Some say hundreds died, others say thousands. The most common estimate points to around 10,000 deaths from poisoned alcohol during Prohibition. A significant portion of these happened in the late 1920s after the government increased the poisons. For hospitals, saw a rise in cases of methanol poisoning. Doctors were shocked. They saw patients come in with severe stomach pain. They had vomiting, they had blurred vision. Many quickly lost their sight entirely. Then their organs would fail, and they would die. It was a terrible way to go. The victims were not just criminals. They were ordinary people. They were workers. They were people who just wanted a drink. They bought alcohol from bootleggers. They trusted that it was at least safe enough to drink. They did not know it had been made deadly by their own government. News of these deaths spread. Newspapers reported on it. Public health officials spoke out. Dr. Charles Norris was New York City's chief medical examiner. He was one of the loudest critics. He called it government-sanctioned murder. He publicly condemned the policy. He said the government was acting like a serial killer. He published articles. He gave interviews. He tried to raise awareness. Doctors joined him. They argued it was unethical. They said the government had a duty to protect its citizens, not poison them. Even some dry advocates, people who supported Prohibition, started to question the policy. They were horrified by the deaths. They believed Prohibition should be enforced, but not at such a terrible human cost. They saw it as going too far. The government's response was firm. They stuck to their story. They said they were not poisoning drinking alcohol. They were just making industrial alcohol unusable. They said the blame rested squarely on the bootleggers and on the people who chose to drink illegal liquor. They argued that people knew the risks of drinking bootleg alcohol, and they knew industrial alcohol was not for consumption. Therefore, they said, the victims were responsible for their own fate. This argument did not sit well with many. It felt cold. It felt detached. It felt like the government was washing its hands of the deaths. While technically true that bootleggers sold the alcohol, the government was providing the deadly ingredients. And they were doing it knowing full well what could happen. The controversy grew. It became a major talking point. It highlighted the failures of Prohibition. It showed how extreme the government was willing to be. It put a dark stain on the noble experiment. The public became increasingly uneasy. The moral authority of Prohibition was eroded. The deaths from poisoned alcohol became a powerful symbol. They showed the human price of trying to enforce an unpopular law through deadly means. This played a significant role in changing public opinion. It helped pave the way for the eventual end of Prohibition. The intentional poisoning of alcohol was a dark chapter. It left a lasting mark on American history. It showed how far the government would go to enforce a law, and it showed the tragic human cost of those actions. This controversy was one of many things that pushed the public away from Prohibition. People saw the law as ineffective. They saw it as fueling organized crime, and they saw it as dangerous. The deaths from poisoned alcohol solidified this view. It was hard to defend a law that caused so much suffering. Many felt the cure was worse than the disease. In 1933, Prohibition was repealed. The 21st Amendment brought alcohol back legally. The noble experiment ended, and with it, the government's policy of poisoning industrial alcohol also stopped. The immediate crisis of mass poisoning ended. But the question remained, did the U.S. government intentionally poison alcohol during Prohibition? The answer is a qualified yes. Here's why first. The government intentionally added poisons to industrial alcohol. They didn't do it by accident. This was a deliberate policy. They chose specific deadly chemicals. They increased their amounts. This was not a mistake. Second, they did it with the full knowledge that these chemicals would cause harm, including death, if consumed. Their doctors, public health officials, and newspapers warned them. They ignored these warnings. They continued and even escalated the policy. They knew the potential outcomes. However, it's important to clarify the intent. The government's primary goal was not to simply kill people. Their stated goal was to deter bootleggers and consumers. They wanted to make industrial alcohol so unappealing and dangerous that no one would dare turn it into a drink. They wanted to enforce the law. They wanted to break the black market. They saw it as a necessary evil to achieve the aims of Prohibition. So, it was not murder in the sense of targeting individuals for death, but it was a policy that knowingly and intentionally created a highly lethal product. And it was put into a supply chain where it was known people would try to consume it. The government chose to use death as a deterrent. This is a crucial distinction, but does not lessen the tragedy. They deliberately created a deadly situation. The legacy of this period is clear. It shows the limits of government control over personal choices. It highlights the unintended consequences of policies. A law meant to improve public health ended up creating a public health crisis. It showed how moral crusades can sometimes lead to extreme measures. and how these measures can have devastating effects. The Prohibition era teaches us about the complexities of law enforcement. It shows us the fine line between deterrence and direct harm, and it reminds us of the ethical responsibilities of government. The thousands of deaths from poisoned alcohol are a stark reminder of a time when the government's pursuit of a social ideal led to a dark and deadly reality for its own citizens. It remains a powerful story of government overreach and the human cost of a deeply flawed policy.